Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the February meeting of the San Diego Premiere Pro user group. It is great to see you here. I hope you're all doing well. We have a very great, very informative and a great presenter tonight. So I'm glad you all showed up. You picked a great night to be here. I don't think DJ is going to make it tonight. So you got me just tonight. We'll do some quick announcements. Don't really know if I have any announcements. I will say I booked my NAB flight and hotel and everything last night. So if you are interested in going to NAB, I suggest you do the same. Paul, do you come to NAB? Is that like a thing you do?
I used to speak at NAB. I spoke 3 or 4 years in a row, but I've just been too busy the last few years to get there.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it being back. I'll be there for 2 days. 3 days this year, 2.5 days. But I just find out this. Have you ever been to Media Motion Ball?
I've never been.
Oh, okay. Well, it is a great, in my estimation, Media Motion Ball is the best part of NAB. And this is the last year they're doing it. I just found out. So yes.
I remember missing the Media Motion Ball where at the end they gave everybody in attendance a free
Red Giant.
Red Giant, yeah. And it was a last minute decision not to go, and then afterwards I found out everybody got free Red Giant.
So I'll tell you the story about that because I got a little story while we're waiting here for a second before people get in. I go to Media Motion Ball every year I go. That was the year that my kids were born and I needed to get home. So I only went for one day. I actually had a ticket to Media Motion Ball, but I told my wife at the last minute, I said, you know what, honey, I'll come home. We had twins, so I had to come home. I said, I will come home and be there so that, it's not too tough on you and my mother-in-law who's staying with us. And I'm at the airport waiting to come home during Media Motion Ball. And I'm seeing all the tweets from everybody there saying, I can't believe I just got, a full Red Giant suite. I can't believe Red Giant did this. Da, da, da. And a little piece of me died. And I sent Carrie, one of the guys who run Media Motion Ball, an email and said, hey, so if we have a ticket, does that mean we get one? No, you had to be in attendance. So I was super bummed about that. And actually, I'm still bitter at Red Giant about that, but whatever. Good for them. Good for everybody there. Let's put it that way. Okay, but get back to the announcements. NAB. You guys should sign up if you want to go. It is really, really worth it. Go for a day. I mean, come on. If you're in San Diego, it's an hour flight to Vegas, an hour back. Just go for a single day. I guarantee you will learn a lot. You will meet a lot of really cool people, unless you're a complete introvert like I am sometimes. But even then, step out of your bubble and go talk to some folks. There's a lot of really cool people that show up to there, especially at the Adobe booth, the Blackmagic booth, all the booths. Definitely worth going. So check that out. The second quick thing I will talk about, there was a Premiere update, 23.2 came out. I would definitely recommend getting that update. Usual caveat applies. If you're right at the end of a big project, and everything is working perfect for you, do not update until you're done with that project. But it should improve some issues. I know Andy Edwards is in here. I don't know if Andy has any comments on what it fixes, or if he wants to mention that. But Andy, if you have any comments about 23.2 you want to make, that'd be great. Otherwise, we'll just leave it at donate or download it. And then speech to text, or not speech to text, text editing inside Premiere is in beta. I will be honest, I had intended to do a really quick demo of text editing for this meeting, but I am slammed with work and was not able to. So I will either put together something on my own and post it up to the YouTube channel, or next month we will demo it there, I promise. So either way, but definitely download the latest Premiere beta and play with text editing. It is amazing. So definitely worth doing. So with that,
keep in mind that maybe you didn't get a Red Giant, but you got twins.
Oh man, a really bad joke just popped in my head that I'm not going to say, but because I love my children to death. But yes, you're right. I got the better gift. So, but the sarcastic person in me wanted to say something really mean and bad that I will never say. So no, I love my kids, and yes, I did come out on top.
Made one of them Red Giant then.
You know how many people? So I had a boy and a girl. Do you know how many of my friends, me being the Star Wars fan that I am, told me I should name my kids Luke and Leia? DJ being one of them. Can you imagine the horror of the picking on how they'd be teased and stuff like that? There's no way I'm going to do that to my kids. Although that would be pretty cool, and I don't think my wife would go for it. So before we turn things over to Paul and we talk about this, I wanted to double check and see if there's anybody who has any Premiere related questions, troubleshooting, any kind of thing like that we can address in a real brief time that we have here. So if you've got an issue with Premiere and you want to ask myself, Paul's offered to offer up his expertise, try to help your problem. Let's hear it.
I guess my question, he may answer anyway, since he's talking about essential graphics, is that when I'm playing with essential graphics and text, what is the easy way to get back to the normal pointer cursor rather than try to find someplace else on the screen to click and hit a V?
Yeah, that's the only solution. Sorry. That's been a gripe of mine for a while now, is that once you're in text mode, your shortcuts are no longer applying. So if you press V, you're typing the letter V on screen to try and get back to the cursor. Yeah, I did come up with I can't remember what the key combination is, but it's like there's two keys that will remove focus from the text box and then V. I just can't remember I can't remember what the shortcut is, but there's something that you can press that will remove focus from that text box, and then V will give you your cursor. But at that point, I'm sort of debating, should I just grab my mouse anyway?
Does that answer your question, Bob?
Well, it doesn't give me an answer, but at least I'm not alone.
Because listen, I experienced that as well. And I guess I don't really know what the solution would be. I get, part of me thinks like, well, if there was like a right mouse click and you hit the control key, it would switch you back maybe, or something like that. But I don't know. So, okay.
In some of the other software, you just hit escape. I don't know with Premiere, but yeah, that's the way the other ones work. So you might try that.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I'm pretty sure it doesn't.
Marshall says it doesn't, Lois.
Then I guess it doesn't.
I don't think it does. I think these guys will probably agree.
I'm going to go try it tomorrow.
Well, Bob, Paul, what do you think? Off with her head? Should we leave it on? Off with her head.
It's sad.
All right. Any other questions before we have, Marshall and Lois go at it on Zoom here? Okay. There's nothing else. We will move on. All right. So main event. Something that came up a lot in our planning and our talking to everybody about meetings for this year was you guys seem to have a lot of interest in both the essential graphics panel, but graphics in general. Best way to create graphics, how to make better graphics, how to use the tools between After Effects and Premiere, creating MOGRTs. There's just a lot of requests for that kind of information. And so something that DJ and I kind of came up with was, doing a multi-meeting kind of, series where we would work you through a lot of that, and the starting point of that in Premiere is the essential graphics panel. And so tonight we will, Paul's going to kind of go through that and show you how to do all the things that you can do with it, and creating graphics and, and using that tool to its fullest extent. And then down the road, we're going to dive deeper into creating MOGRTs and creating graphics in After Effects and taking things to a more advanced level inside Premiere. And, but this meeting is the big one, because if you don't know the essential graphics panel, the EGP, if you don't know how to use that, you don't know what the tools are and everything, then, you're just going to get lost later on. And so that's why this meeting, in my opinion, was so crucial. To find someone who really knows it. And fortunately, Paul was generous enough to, give his time to the group to demo this stuff. If you have questions, go ahead and chime in. You can either post them in the chat pod or I don't think we have a Q&A pod, so just put them in the chat pod. And then Paul will answer them as we go through. I might chime in, and let him know he's got a question if need be. But anyway, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Paul Murphy. He's known online as the Premiere Pro. If you don't subscribe to his YouTube channel, why not? You should. But I will let him kind of introduce himself and kind of tell you more about him. And with that, Paul, take it away.
Okay, I have nothing prepared for my actual introduction. Hi, I'm Paul. I'm Australian, if you can't tell from the accent. I did live in the US for about 6 years. I lived in New York up until the pandemic, where I was doing a lot of editing for places like Comedy Central. I've been using Premiere since, I'm going to say 2002, which may have been Premiere 6, not CS6, but Premiere 6. And then we went to 7, which became Premiere Pro, and on it went. And I've always been sort of obsessive with the way that it works and the way that it can make my work as an editor faster. In 2010, I edited my first feature film in Premiere Pro, which was kind of unheard of at the time. It was a documentary called Red Obsession that was narrated by Russell Crowe, and it won the equivalent of the Oscar here in Australia for Best Documentary. And I've continued to make feature films in Premiere Pro since then. And I use it every single day. And I love when there are new features that come in that sort of make my workload different or interesting or faster. And I still remember the day I was at Adobe, what was it called? It was called Adobe Video World, was their conference where they announced that next year we're going to have something coming out that's going to make graphics in Premiere Pro easier. And I was like, yeah, I'd like to see that. And I must admit, I still feel as though the Essential Graphics panel has a way to go, but I do think that it's incredibly powerful. But more than that, I also feel as though it's not being taught enough and well enough, because there are lots of little interesting bits and pieces in there that not enough people sort of know about. So what I'm going to do in the presentation that I've prepared, and I'm happy to go off script if you have any questions at any time about what I'm talking about. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sort of simple. And if you are a pro user and you sort of think simple is not the right speed for you, we will be sort of ramping it up. And I'll definitely have some tips for the pro users towards the end that you wouldn't be aware of. But I'm just going to share my screen so we can get started on this. I'm not going to be able to see any of you from this point on. So if you have any questions or anything, somebody will have to shout it out to me. But here I am in Premiere Pro, and I've got my Essential Graphics. I've actually got my graphics workspace open at the moment. So I'm actually using the captions and graphics workspace. And I find that one of the best ways to teach Essential Graphics is by playing around with lower thirds. I find that lower thirds is something that we use almost every day in the work that we do. And there's a lot of different styles of animation that come with it. So I'm going to talk through a bit of design in terms of lower thirds, and I'm also going to talk through animation and effects and some other things like that too. So first of all, I mean, the most simplest thing is that we need to add a graphic, like a lower third down here. So I'm going to do that the most boring and simple way, which is to go up here, and we're going to say we want a new layer, which is text. And there's our default text layer here. I'm going to say this is Jane Doe, and she is an influencer. And of course, we've got our text over here, and up here is our actual Essential Graphics panel, where we can play around with the settings of this here. But first thing that stands out to me is that it's really not standing out, this text here. And this is maybe a little off topic to begin with, but I just want to show you something that I always do in terms of making text stand out in a picture like this. First of all, I would go on and add a shadow to this text, which is already doing quite a bit of work there. But it's really this sort of contrasty highlighted area here. Usually for something like that, I would go into the actual source clip, and I'm just going to go to my effects. I'm going to grab the Lumetri effect, which is all the way down the bottom here. I'll drag that onto the clip, and I could open up my Lumetri panel, but I can't be bothered. I'm just going to go into my effect controls, and I'm going to go down to basic correction. I'm just going to turn the exposure down until I feel like I can sort of see that text a bit better. You don't want to go too far with this, just enough that you're getting contrast in your image there. And I'll also go to that Lumetri effect, and I'm just going to grab this free draw Bezier tool, and I'll just try and create some edges around this so the whole image isn't dark. Maybe something like that. And then I'll feather this out so that we shouldn't be aware of it when we're actually looking at the picture, but it is making our text stand out a bit more. Now, that was a little bit of a distraction. I'm sorry for that, but it's going to drive me mad unless I fix that up beforehand. So then in terms of the design work that we want to do here, of course, we've got the question here of what kind of font are we going to use? And over here, we have our font options. Now, something that is in here, I still think this could do with a bit of work, but it's good to note that if you have your mouse, if you have your text selected and you have your mouse hovered over the actual font drop down here, if you use your scroll wheel, you can actually iterate through all of your fonts to pick something like that. Something else that you can do is if you open up the list, there's a little checkbox here that says show fonts from Adobe. If you click that, it's only going to show you fonts that are synced with your Adobe Creative Cloud account. And that is really useful, especially if you're somebody who's traveling around a lot, because it means that if this font isn't installed on another computer, so long as you log into your Adobe Creative Cloud account, it will automatically sync that. And you actually have you have the option to get more fonts than just what's here. And all of these come with your account. If you go up to the graphics and titles option up here and choose add fonts from Adobe Fonts, it will actually open up a web browser. And I'll show you the web browser here, where we can actually start to stylize and get an idea of how these fonts might look. So you can just type any sort of sample text you want in here. If we want to get a bit more specific, let's say we want something that's got a medium weight that isn't too wide, maybe has a bit less contrast in the actual text. And now we can start to choose from any of these fonts. And like I said, they will automatically sync with Premiere Pro. So you don't actually have to close down Premiere Pro for these fonts to become available. It also means when you're jumping from machine to machine, they will be available for you so long as you're logged into your account. So what is something? Let's maybe this Bilo. Bilo doesn't look too bad. Regular. I'm going to activate regular, and I'll also activate the medium font. So now that they're active, I don't have to, like I said, I don't have to close this down or anything, which is what you usually have to do when you install a new font. I can just go in here and do a search on Bilo. There they are. They're all ready for me. I'll choose that medium one. And I might also just take this second line here, and I'll just reduce the size of that. And I might also set this to regular. So there's a little bit of difference between these two lines. And it's as simple as that when you're creating your different fonts. And I would recommend going and playing around with that Adobe Fonts website. It does also have the option to upload an image of a font. So if you've got like a poster or some artwork that you're trying to match, you can actually get it to look for fonts that are close to that font. So it's a really useful website to be aware of. One other thing I should mention just before we move on to more of the design stuff as well. While we're talking about design, it's also really important to note that we do have the ability to turn on guides here. So we can, and because this is for web, let's say probably the 10% line here is more than enough. And this uses the same shortcuts as Adobe Photoshop. So Command semicolon or Control semicolon will turn those on and off. The only thing you have to keep in mind there is it will only work when the program monitor is in focus. So you want the program monitor in focus, and you can use that shortcut there. Now, let's move a bit further beyond just simple text here. Let's start to add something like a background to this text so that it's really standing out from the actual picture behind it. And we have the option with the Essential Graphics to actually turn on the background setting for this text. And what that means is whatever space that text is covering, it's going to put pixels behind it. And we can make that nice and dark. We can also expand it so it's sort of overshooting the text as well. And one of the more recent features that they've added is they've also added this curved radius to the corners. So you can actually have some nice curved corners around that just by checking a box and adjusting a few things. That's really good that we can get there that quickly. Now, in terms of color, we also have a color picker here. Maybe I'll choose this green, and then I'll open up the color, and we'll make this a little bit more saturated and a little bit darker like that. So no, I'm just not happy with that. I might actually, let's go for something a bit blue maybe. Yeah, no, sorry, I'm going to get a perfection. I'm going to become a perfectionist on this. All right, something like that. That's better. All right, let's go with that. Now, what is really good about using this checkbox to quickly create a background is we basically have an auto background. And that means if we go in and change the name here, let's use my last name, which is Murphy. If we change it to Jane Murphy, you'll see that the box is actually growing with it. So we have basically a templated lower third that we can use in a lot of different situations. And that is really good. That's amazing that we have that and we can create that so quickly. But there is a few drawbacks on this that I like to bring up. I'm going to have solutions to a couple of them. One of them I won't have a solution to. And the first is if I wanted to add a shadow around this background layer here, I can't do it with this shadow checkbox that I'm using down here. You'll notice that the shadow checkbox is only being applied to the, it's only being applied to the text itself. It's not being applied to the actual background. Now, my workaround for that is if you grab the drop shadow effect, and then you just drag this above your text layer, it's now going to add that drop shadow effect behind that box. So maybe that's not such a limitation. It's not too bad. The other thing is if I wanted to add a stroke around this background, if I go on and turn on stroke, you'll notice it's actually adding the stroke to the text, just like with the shadow. And that's certainly not what we want. So, and strokes are one of the hardest things in Premiere to add to graphics at the moment. So I'll take the easiest ways we can do that. And the other limitation is if I wanted to add a gradient to this background. So rather than having just an opaque flat color, if I wanted to add a gradient, I don't have that option here. I can only pick one color with this background checkbox. So it's got a few limitations. It's very quick in some other places, but it is limited in certain places. So what we'll need to do in that situation is if we want to add a background where we have a bit more control of its layout, what we're going to need to do is add a shape here. So I'm going to turn off this background and I'm going to go up here, and rather than using our graphics menu up here, I'm just going to use the new layer button over here to add a rectangle. There is actually a shortcut for this, and it is Option Command R to add a rectangle, which I guess would be Alt Control R on a PC. And I'll call this background, and I'm going to go nuts trying to get that color back that I had before. Let's go with that one. And I'll just put this over my image. Now, of course, we have a stacking order up here. This is kind of like Photoshop, and I mean, kind of like the tracks in your timeline as well, is whatever is on top is going to be on top of what's beneath it. So you won't be able to see it. It's going to obscure it. I need to drag this down, and I'll just sort of get the shape for this a little bit better. In this new version, not this latest new version, but I think it was the previous update or the update before that, they did add some really good alignment tools inside of Premiere, which is if I select this, I now have the option to choose between align to selection or align to video frame as a group, or align to video frame. And just to quickly show you what that means is if I select these two items like this, and I say that I want to align to the video frame, then when I say go to the center, everything goes to the center. So you see that that space between those two objects is no longer there. Now, if I have the option to choose align to video frame as a group, when I do that, it's going to respect that space that was initially between them and center them in the middle of the frame. Now, what the selection one is really good for is if I put this in the middle of the box, as best I can do it, and then select them together, now with align to selection, it's going to make sure that that is centered inside of that box. So with inside of that selection space, basically. So it's good to know the difference between those, because before we had those options come along, it was actually quite difficult just to do a lot of alignment there. So we have that option there. And now that we have a separate background layer, we are able to add in those limitations that we had added before. So, you know, most importantly, we can add a stroke here, right? And we can change the actual width of that stroke. We can add a shadow, and that shadow is being added to the box, and it's not being added to the text anymore. I should also mention, I love these little controls here. You'll see that the box has 4 white dots in the corners. These actually control the radius of those corners. And if you click and drag them inwards, you'll see you can actually control the degree of that radius. I think that's a really nice control, and they have this in Photoshop now as well. And the other really important thing here that was really impossible to do in our previous setting where we were using that auto background is if I click the fill of this background layer, we can choose a solid color, but we can also choose a linear or radial gradient. So if I go for a linear, this always annoys me. It always goes to black and white. I've lost that perfect color that I had before. So let's go with something like that. So this is one part of the gradient. I'll click over here and choose another part of the gradient, maybe like a darker blue. That looks terrible. Let's go up a bit. Yeah, all right. Yeah, I'll let it go for now. And you might not be able to see this as clearly on your screens, but there is just this little line here where I can actually control the direction of that gradient. So I could say, look, I want that darker blue bit down there, and I'll have the lighter blue bit up there. So, you know, gradients, and that one's not a really good gradient. I'm actually not liking that at all. That's better. Gradients can add like a really nice sort of professionalism to the look of the image rather than just having flat colors too. So that's really handy to have. Now, we have, by doing this, by separating out our text layer and our background, we have compromised one really useful feature that we had before. And this you might consider too big to give up. And that is that ability for that box to grow now. If I go in here and say that this woman's name is Jane Premier, you'll see that the box is not growing anymore. So we've lost that ability to scale the background when the text changes as well. But we do have another feature that we can use to do that, and it's really handy in all sorts of design. But basically what we can do is we can go down to the background layer here. So I'm going to select my background. And underneath that is the option for responsive design position. And what that means is I can grow this background when other layers in my Essential Graphics panel are growing. So I'm going to pin it to my text layer. And at the moment, it's not doing anything. I actually need to say what edge of that text layer do I want it to track? Do I want it to follow? I'm just going to click in the center so that it selects all of the edges here. And now if we go back in here and type Jane Murphy, you'll see that that box is growing at the same time. So we've overcome that problem. And that's a really good way to, because lower thirds, of course, aren't something that you just create once and move on with your life. You usually create them once and then you want to roll them out to a lot of different subjects in an edit. So it's always good to have that ability for them to grow and adapt to what you're trying to do as well. Another sort of iteration of what we're doing here as well is we can just turn off the fill. So sorry, not on the text though. If we go into the background and turn off the fill, then we can have this nice sort of empty text here. Now shadow is probably a little bit too strong there, but now you've got like an outline around your text that can grow with your actual writing as well. So that's handy too. Now, one other thing that I want to add to the design here before we move into the actual animation side of things is the ability to add things that aren't text and shapes in here. And we can really add any kind of video or Photoshop layer, Photoshop file, JPEG, anything, PNG, we can add it into this Essential Graphics panel. And I do, before I get it into my project, I just want to make mention that a really good thing to have if you are on the road a lot is to be using the Premiere Pro libraries. And I have a YouTube channel where I have a lot of my branding sitting in that library all the time. So if I'm on my laptop or my desktop, wherever I am, I can easily grab that branding and use it in my projects. So let's say we wanted to, I'm in my San Diego Premiere Pro users library here that I've created beforehand, and I've got some social media icons. Let's say we want to use this Instagram logo. Now, what I wish I could do was just drag this up to here, but I get the you can't do that sign. What I actually have to do first is right click this and say add to project. And now that image is available in my project. So now I can actually drag from here up to the top. And we've got a very big logo here. If I get my cursor and select this, I can start to just resize this like that. And we'll move that down there. And I might just move my text across as well. Now you can see there's a little bit of a problem going on there, right? And that problem is that the background is still moving with my text. So what I will do, I might also turn that fill back on. I kind of missed that fill. What I'll do is I'm going to grab my background and I'm just going to unpin it from that text now so that I can have a bit of freedom to move things around. I'll move my text across. I might just shrink my logo down a bit too. Might actually make my background a bit bigger too. And I'll stretch this out so everything is sort of fitting in place like that. That's not a bad look actually. And now what I can do is I can parent the background to the text. I'll click all in the center, and I'll also parent the logo to the text. Click all in the center like that. Oh, that's gone to the video frame. I need to pin it to the text. And now that means that if I pick up this text and I move it around, these things are going to move around with it. There is a little problem here though, and it's worth pointing out, is that if I go in and change this text here, look at what happens to the logo. It's actually starting to stretch the logo. And the reason for that is if I go back to my logo, back to these pinning the pinning settings that I have here, it's important to remember that when you have two edges that are opposite each other selected, that means that any kind of change will result in a scale change. But if I uncheck the opposite, so if I uncheck the opposite to the top and the opposite to the left, that just means that if I'm moving it left or right, or if I'm moving it up or down, it will move with it. It won't scale with it. So now if I go in here and I type Premiere again, the box is scaling because I've set the box that way, but the actual logo isn't going to be scaling. It's just going to move. So if I take that text and I move it up, you'll see everything's moving at once. It's all about trying to make a graphic that is scalable to what you're going to be doing in your edit. You don't want to have to be fussing around with things as you go. So I'm free to move that around wherever I want. I'm free to add text to it, and everything else will stay the same. So that's just an important tip about working with the design side of working in the Essential Graphics. In terms of working with the animation.
Hey, Paul.
Yes.
We do have a couple questions.
Sure. I can take them.
So the first question says, for stroke, can you just duplicate the layer, use the layer below with a bigger stroke, nest group both to act as one?
Absolutely, you can. Absolutely, you can. The problem with that is the growing side of things. I guess you could, so you've got two shapes on top of each other. And so long as both of them are pinned to the text layer. Yeah, all right. Give me a second here. I gotta figure this out in front of myself. So let me just duplicate this for a second. So let's call this stroke. And what I'll do is I'm going to, yeah, actually, I think I know where we're going with this. Okay. So if I had this text here and I had a background and I wanted to have a stroke, of course, well, I don't want to have a stroke, but if I wanted to add a stroke, I could, of course, add another layer to this. Now, the shortcut here for duplicating a layer is Shift-Command/. To duplicate a layer, Shift-Command/, which is also Shift-Control/ on the PC. And I could actually scale this up and change the color of it. Like, let's change this to a white or a gray. Let's change it to a white. And I could scale it up. No, actually, I wouldn't scale it up. That's not what I would do. I would keep this at 100%. And I would, let's change this to white again. And I could actually change that. Now I have a stroke. The only problem with working with strokes this way is the text change. Is if I want to go in and then change this to text, then I've lost that linking between those two. Now, I wonder, sorry, I'm just wondering out loud for a second. I wonder if I was to parent this to the above layer here. If I typed in no. Have I changed the wrong one? No. Yeah, I think that's a good idea to be duplicating it, and I hope I've understood your question correctly. But I think the problem there is that you lose that auto grow by working like that. I hope I've answered your question. Was there another one there?
Yeah, so we have another question from Bob. He says, Paul used 2 font effects in one text layer. Why not a separate text layer for each line?
Yes. And I would actually say that using a separate font effect for each line is probably the better way to do it. I was just trying to be quick then. But the whole point of when we get to animation is that you really want to break those things out into separate pieces anyway, because then you can animate them individually. But that's a good point, is you would actually do that as separate lines, but you can do it within the one paragraph as well.
And Paul asks, can the lines be linked?
Can the lines be linked? Which line?
I'm assuming he's asking, like, if you do 2 lines of text, 2 separate lines.
Oh, yes. Yeah, no, absolutely you can. Yeah. So, I mean, I'll do it now. So if I was to, and you'll notice that my boxes just changed there as well. I guess that's there is an auto grow problem there. But if I was to duplicate this text layer, and I'll just drag this down, and I'll put in that, what did we have? We had influencer, and we'll keep that at regular, make it smaller. Oh, that was the problem we were just talking about then. I just pressed V and yep, did it again. I swear I found the shortcut to that. Oh, something else I should mention as well is something that a lot of people don't know is the shortcut for nudging is Shift Command and then the arrows. Or is it? Oh, wait, that's not. My Shift hasn't been working, so I don't know if that's why that's not working. But it should be Shift Command and arrows to get the nudge there. But for some reason, that's not working. So there, if I was to then parent that influencer line, and I'll just adjust my box here as well so that it's like that. If I was to parent that influencer line to the main line of text, I would probably only want to parent it on one edge of this edge graph here, because I don't want the text to be scaling when this changes. So if I change this to text, then that's good. And it also means that if I was to grab the Jane layer here and move this around, then, oh, I've got the wrong layer there. If I was to move this around, then it is moving around with everything. So you can actually parent them like that as well. In terms of making them grow the box, only one of them can be assigned to growing the box. So I can't say grow this background based on Jane text or the influencer text. It has to be one or the other. So if this was to become a very long line of text, then you're in a bit of a problem there as well.
All right. I think that's the last question for now.
Cool. There we go. I got my nudge back. I think my shift key is dying. But shift command and the arrow keys, or shift control and the arrow keys, that will give you I think it's a 1 pixel, or is it actually just command and the arrow keys is 1 pixel. If you add shift, you're moving, I think 10 or 5 pixels at a time. Okay, so let's talk about some animation. So in terms of animation, I might just set up a new sequence so we can go back to this one. And I want to just quickly look at animating position and also adding a mask to that animation. So we've got the same thing over here. And I think what I'll do here is I'll get rid of some of these items. So we'll keep this really simple. And I'll drag this over to the side down here. And we'll keep it like that. And you're quite right to mention that it's good to sort of break up your different lines like this, because what that means is when you go over to your effect controls over here, you can see that each of these different elements that are in my essential graphics are separated as separate layers. And if I twirl them open, I have access to keyframe all of the different settings that come with that particular layer. So I can do the animation over here, or I can also do it over here in my essential graphics. So if I jump to something like 1 second, and I want to add, actually, I'm going to do it for Jane text just to get started. If I want to do it for Jane text, I don't know why I keep calling this Jane text. Let's call it name. If I want to add a keyframe here, I'm going to go over to the position settings here. And I just want to click the little toggle animation for position. When I click that, it's now recording keyframes wherever I move this around. So you can see it's actually added a little keyframe there. If I twirl this open and I'll just collapse the source text settings, there's a little keyframe for position. If I move back to the start of my sequence, I can just drag this off. And there it is. We have an animation. Now, of course, I parented these, not parented, but what do we say in Premiere? I pinned these two things together, which is why they're moving in unison. If I was to go to that influencer setting and just turn off those pin settings, then you'll notice now that just the text is animating by itself there. And I can do the same thing with the influencer. I will select that text. And we have just done it in the essential graphics. I'll do it over here now. This is a little bit harder because there are so many settings to go through. Sometimes you can get a little lost here. What I'm going to do is turn on keyframes for position. I'll move my playhead back to the start and I'll just drag this off. So you can actually adjust your settings over there as well. And now we have an animation like that. Now, maybe we want these two lines to move a little out of sync with each other. So I can see that I'm looking at the Jane text here, the name. I might just grab the keyframes for the influencer. Now, to grab all of the keyframes, I just select the position name and I'll just move these a little bit out like that so that the name keyframes start first, and then we should have the influencer keyframes come after that. So we've got something like that. Now that looks kind of boring. One thing that kind of stands out to me is I would always add like an ease in to the end keyframe. So if you just select both of the keyframes there, you can say we want to have an ease in, and then they won't just suddenly stop. They'll actually ease into the picture. Now, if we wanted to make this look a little bit more stylish, rather than seeing the text sort of come off the frame like that, it might be good to actually say, well, we only want to see the text when it starts to come across about here. And for that, I'm going to need to mask all of this area that the text is traveling to get to that place. So to do that, we need to add a mask. And masks are one of the most interesting things. All right, I'm going to correct that statement. they're the second most interesting thing you can play around with in the essential graphics. Very simple to add though, even more simple than After Effects, I would say, is all we need to do is go over to our essential graphics, and I'm going to add a rectangle, and I'll just put this on top of the text. Basically, I'm selecting the area that I want to be able to see of the text, and everything outside of that area I don't want to see. I hope that sentence makes sense. And then I'm going to rename it mask up the top here so that we understand what it is. And right down the bottom, I'm just going to say mask with shape. And what that means is that everything below this layer, so every other layer that sits below this layer, I can only see it within the confines of that actual shape. So now we have an animation that looks like that. So it looks a little bit better than it coming just straight off the edge of the frame. And you could even put like a little shape here. In fact, I could just do that now if I just added another rectangle, and we'll turn off the stroke for that. And we'll put it next to the text, and it will look like, well, it will look like our actual text is coming out from that shape there. So I might even just need to correct that mask a little bit, maybe like there. Also, the other thing I should notice, that it's probably not clear on your screens, but the mask has a shadow on it. So when it actually comes across, it's a little bit blurred when it comes across. So I'm going to turn that shadow off so it's nice and sharp. And now we have an animation that looks like that. And that's a pretty standard sort of elegant animation that you have there. And maybe you could animate this particular shape beforehand. But that's sort of the simple part of revealing a piece of text. Now, maybe what we wanted to do was to sort of build onto this shape layer where the text is sort of coming out. Maybe we want maybe like an icon or a logo or something to actually be revealing that text. And to do that, I'll delete this shape for now, and I'll grab that Instagram logo that we had. I'm going to move it up here, and I'll shrink this down. So it should be about that size there. And let's say we want it to end up there. I'm also going to turn off the keyframes for these layers, for these text layers. So to do that, I'm just going to select the layer and then just click the toggle animation. That will actually kill those keyframes that we've just added. And I'll just move this text to the right of our logo like that. I might just move this logo up a bit like that. And just to explain what I'd like to do here is I want the logo to actually, I won't lose that position. I'm going to add a keyframe there. I'm going to jump forward 1 second and add a keyframe on the position of that logo. And then at the start, I want the logo to actually start over here. And I'll go over to my effect controls panel, and I want to ease this in so that the logo is doing something like that. But what I want the logo to do is, as it's coming in, I want it to reveal that text. And to do that, we're going to use two things that we've already gone through, but when you put them together, they're actually really powerful for creating interesting graphics. And that is to have a mask. So we've got our mask here, going to extend this out so that it goes all the way up to the edge of this graphic of the Instagram icon. And I'm going to invert this mask. So I'll go down here and I'm going to click invert. So now what I'm saying is I don't want to see anything if it appears inside of this shape. I only want to see outside of this shape. And then I'm going to pin this mask to that Instagram logo that we've just animated. So if I go here, I'm going to say with the mask selected, pin it to the Instagram logo, and I want you to pin it to all edges. So now when that logo flies in, it's going to reveal our text like that. And you could actually, if you don't like the fact that the text is sort of flush against the logo there, you can actually build in a little bit of, I guess what you'd call padding, as if I was to extend that mask just up to there. So it sort of overshoots the logo a bit. Now, as it comes in, there's that little space there as it comes in. It's always just those little details that make it look a little bit more professional, I think. So there you go. So we're combining those different ideas now to get those different types of animations.
Hey, Paul, we do have
yeah.
a quick question here.
Sure.
Is there a way to control the ease in and out more like the expressions graph in AE? I don't think there is, but is there?
The expressions graph. Oh yes, yeah, of course there is. So it's not as good though. It's nowhere near as good. But if we go over to our effect controls panel here, and we go to our position settings, you can see we actually do have a graph that it's kind of hard to see, and we don't really have the ability to make it bigger. But if I select one of these keyframes, I do have those Bezier handles that I can control, and I can really push this up so that it really eases in. So now it should have a really slow ease into its position like that. So it sort of shoots out fast and eases in like that. Unfortunately, we can't control the vertical scale of the graph, but this is definitely worth playing around with if you are familiar with playing around with the, what do we call it in After Effects? We call it the something graph, the Bezier graph. No.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, that's the graph that you would use. It's just a little bit smaller, but you can certainly get those same results there. You can play around with all types of sort of easing in settings there. Okay, so that's revealing with a logo, and more than revealing with a logo, we're combining the mask and the idea of pinning something as well to make that reveal happen. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about, it's going to start to get a little bit more detailed in terms of the workflow. But what we're going to do is, yeah, maybe this is a good one to use as a starting point. We're going to reveal the text inside of this background layer here. So I'll just rename this so I don't lose track of it. Reveal inside. And what that means is I want to animate the text across like we did before, where it was coming across from the side of the frame, but I want to mask off any kind of area of the text where we don't want to see it. So to quickly show you how this would work, and I've already pinned these two things together, so that's good. And then I'll add my animation for the text. So I'll add a keyframe for my text layer here. I'll press home to get to the start of my sequence, and then I'll just pull, whoa, I must have some strange pinning going on here. Let's turn off the pinning for the background layer, and we'll turn off the pinning for the icon as well. And what I'll do is I'll have this text move off like that. So it's just before the Instagram logo, and then it comes in like this, but I don't want to see any of the text before it comes in. And I'll also just add an ease in there because that just looks better. So I'll right click and say ease in. Now, this is where things get tricky. Obviously, actually, I say they get tricky. They just get tricky in terms of thoughts, but it's actually really easy. The solution is actually very simple. But you're thinking, how do I actually hide the area of the text when it's over here? And your first answer would probably be, I would use a mask. And of course you would. That's what you would do. That's what you're literally doing. You're masking something. So let's just create a quick mask here. We'll call this a mask, and we'll highlight the area where we want to be able to see the text. So we'll call this our mask, and I'll say mask with shape. And we get this, and that is that anything, as I said before, any kind of masks that you're adding up here is going to be affecting the layers below it. Now, maybe there's a short get around here where we could say, okay, well, I'll just move the Instagram layer above the mask, and now we can see it. It's not being affected by that mask anymore. But we still have the problem of the background, because by its name alone, it has to be in the background. It has to be below the text. It can't be above it for us to control where that mask is being applied. And that's where I think I said mask was my most favorite thing in the Essential Graphics panel, which is not true. It's my second most favorite thing. My most favorite, I think the most interesting feature in Premiere Pro that doesn't get talked about enough is this little button here, which is create group. And the first time I saw that button, I thought, great, I'll be able to organize all of my graphics. And of course, we never have time to organize our graphics, so we hardly ever use it. But what this does more than just organize your graphics is organize how effects and masks are applied to the layers in your graphics. So what I can actually do here is select my mask and select my text. And I'm going to click Create Group. And you'll see that now that mask is only being applied to the objects inside of that group. So I find that incredibly powerful that now we have this way of actually saying this effect, this mask, whatever, I only want you to apply it to these particular layers that are sitting within that group. So now we have an animation looking like this, where the mask is only being applied to what we want to apply it to. So that is really powerful to be able to do that sort of work there. And just to sort of take that idea of groups and masks and things like that a step further is you can also do things where you can control how things are being affected by animation. So just a quick example of that is something like a linear wipe. If you wanted to apply a linear wipe to some text over here, so I might just turn that mask off. And I'll also kill this animation. Let's say rather than having this text move into frame, what we'll do instead is we want it to actually wipe, have sort of like a horizontal wipe into frame. So to do that, I've just added the linear wipe effect above the influencer and the Jane text layer. And I'll just quickly get the settings for that particular effect. So up here, I can see this is my linear wipe. I'll set the wipe angle to 270 degrees. I'll add a keyframe and then I'll move back to the start and I'll set this so that Jane has completely disappeared. I'll also turn up the feathering because it's always nice to have like a little bit of feathering when this appears so that for that line, we have some animation that looks like this. So it actually wipes on like that. And that's really nice. Now, if I wanted to do that one line at a time, we're back to that same predicament, is that the effect is affecting everything that's underneath it inside of the group. So for something like this, the solution is to just put these in their own group. So if I select the effect and the influencer line, and I can put it inside a group, and that's a group inside a group. So we're definitely in Inception now. And then what I can do is put Jane text. Actually, I've also done this wrong because I've put influencer in with the wipe. I need to add this down to the name. And I'm just going to duplicate this layer too. So Shift Command or Control /. I've just duplicated those exact settings for that linear wipe. And I'll drag that into the influencer group. And now, as we did with our animation before, we can sort of offset these things a bit as well. So I'll select the keyframes for the second line and I'll offset them like that. So now we should have the text wipe on and then the name underneath it wipe on as well. So really, really powerful groups is controlling how and where you want to apply your effects and your masks. Do we have any questions about that before I move on?
We had a question from Bob a little bit ago, and Bob, you might want to chime in because it says, how do we copy this to the next frame with John Doe? And I think that was before you kind of started getting onto this section. So Bob, what was your question again? And feel free to turn your mic on.
Well, basically what I'm thinking is, okay, we've got her lower thirds or whatever you want to call it. How do we copy all that work that you've done to the next person you're going to show? Maybe that's coming down the line already, but
yeah,
make sure it's coming.
I mean, the short answer, and I will get to another answer to that, but the short answer is just the Option or the Alt key. So Option or Alt key will actually click and drag, we'll duplicate that. So now we have another instance of it where we can change that text, but this one still remains the same. So that's just a quick way of duplicating on the timeline, is to use the Option or the Alt key, click and drag to duplicate it and create a new instance of it where you can completely change the settings. But probably a more elegant solution that I'll try to get to in a moment is the idea of turning this into a motion graphics template that you can just sort of roll out whenever you need it. Use it across different projects as well. So I'm just going to touch on effects, and then we'll get to motion graphics timeline. I don't want to get too stuck on effects because I think that there's basically my like overwhelming advice with effects is anything that you have here in your effects panel, and that includes plugins, whatever you've got, it can all be applied in this layer stack in the Essential Graphics panel. Inside of groups, whatever you want to do, you can apply it to those layers inside of your Essential Graphics. So the thing that I would say to you is, after we've talked today, go and look at your effects and think, I wonder what it'd look like if I played around with this, because there's so much that you can do here. But there are a few effects that I'd like to highlight of things that you can do. Something that I find really handy, and this is really good if you find that you do a lot of graphics where you have to have a certain kind of animation, but you're sort of switching out images a lot. So let's do it with this. Let's do it with this logo here, for example. Let's say that this logo, can't remember what animation I had here. Let's say that this logo had some sort of animation where it would just pop up. So I'll add some keyframes there, and then I'll drag it down like that. So let's say it just pops up like that. Okay. Now, if I wanted to switch that out with like a Facebook or a Twitter icon, I'm going to have to keyframe that again from scratch. And this is where using effects is really good for this. So what I'll actually do is I'll kill those keyframes and get rid of them. And I'm going to go over to my effects. Shortcut for effects is Shift-7. And I'm going to get the transform effect. So this is just like the position settings that we were using before, but because it's an effect, I can actually apply it without applying it to a specific layer. And I'll put these two things in their own group so that the transform is only affecting that layer that's in the group there. And I'll do a similar animation here where I go to 12 seconds. Now for this, I will need to go over to my effect controls panel. I can't play around with the settings here, but I'll just turn on an animation for position, and I'll do a ease in. I'll move to the start, and I'll just drag this off like this. So there's that same animation that we had before, but a producer's come along and said, this isn't for Instagram, this is actually for Facebook. So what I can do is I'll go back over to my library and I'll get my Facebook logo, and I can just drag this straight underneath into that group. I'll change the size of this graphic so that it's the right size, like that. And I'll just turn off the Instagram layer, although I could delete it if I wanted to. But the best part of this is that that animation is still there. So it's still applying that transform effect to whatever is below it. It's just not applying it directly to that layer, which allows us to just throw anything into that folder. We could throw multiple icons in here and they'll all be affected by that transform effect. Some of the other effects that I reckon are worth playing around with and seeing what you can do with them is something like a Gaussian blur. So you have the ability to keyframe that blurriness of, maybe you could have like a blur in reveal of text. So if I drag this into a group with the name, for example, I can keyframe that blurriness to have some sort of way of revealing the text there. And of course, if I'm doing it in a group, then I can have them blur in at different rates. Another really cool one is just basic 3D. And you can actually like throw this above the whole layer, so it's affecting everything in the layer. And you could have this sort of swivel in, you know, add a little bit of bounce to it, or fall down like that. You could do all sorts of interesting things with this. I really like the way that basic 3D works with shapes as well. So if I had a layer like that and I put it into a group just with the 3D effect, then you can start to like get some interesting sort of 3D effects here. you know, you can actually start to play around with, like, if I was to rotate that shape like that, you see you've actually got kind of a 3D graphic going on there. So there's some interesting stuff you can do with basic 3D that I recommend you playing around with. And the only other thing I'd mention here in terms of effects is don't be put off by an effect just because it has the word VR at the start of it. So even though it's VR digital glitch, that doesn't mean you can't use it for your own sort of effect, for your own like 2D stuff. And VR glitch is a great one to play around with. You can get some really interesting sort of glitch on effects. So you can actually reveal it with a glitch. And the other one that I would recommend is good for backgrounds, especially if you're doing like, if you're trying to get like if you're trying to get more of a sort of news sort of ticker look. Something that a lot of tickers have is they have like an undulating, changing sort of gradient effect on them. So you can do that with VR fractal noise. So you could apply a fractal noise to the background. And what would I do here? It's a little bit stretched. So I would probably go in and change the complexity of the fractal noise down to 1. So it's almost like sort of blurred out image here. And I'll turn up the scale on that as well. And now if I go and use the evolution setting, so if I adjust the evolution, then you've got this nice sort of moving gradient as your background. Now, at the moment, it's black and white, but you can actually play around with that by going down to your blending modes. And this will blend that grayscale image against your background. So you could go and change this to overlay, for example. And if you then add keyframes to that evolution, then you've got this nice sort of moving evolution in the background of your gradient. So that is what I would say about effects. My bottom line with effects is go and play with them. Use the plugins that you've got. There's so much that you can do there to get interesting effects in your essential graphics. The last thing that I wanted to mention here that we were talking about, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. It is not the end of the day for me, so I've got all the time in the world, is you want to be able to reuse this particular graphic again. You want to use it in multiple projects. Well, the best way to do that is to be saving this as a motion graphic title. And this sort of ties into what I was saying before about working with libraries as well, is you can save this template many different places, but the best place to save it is to a library. So to do that, all I need to do is select the graphic clip in my timeline, and I want to go up to graphics, and then I want to say, oh wait, hold on. Where's it gone? They've moved it out of here. Maybe I can do it up here. I've lost sorry. This is just suddenly, oh, there we go. I don't know why it's a right click there. Oh, there it is. I just didn't see it. Export as motion graphics template. And like I said, you could save this to your local drive, but then it's sort of stuck in your local drive. So the thing I would recommend the most is to create a library for it. I've got one here for the San Diego Premiere Pro users, and then I'm going to click OK. And then that's put it up to my Adobe Creative Cloud account. So any computer where I'm logged in, I have access to that. And that means that if I'm jumping into a new project, all I need to do is go over to the Browse tab in my Essential Graphics here. And I'm going to say I want to look at the libraries, and the only library I want to look at is San Diego. There it is. And I can just drag this into my timeline and start playing around with it there. So that's a really, and the other good thing about these motion graphics, now there are 2 flavors of motion graphics. There's ones that are built in Premiere Pro. There are also ones that are built in After Effects. The Premiere Pro ones are really smooth at playback, and they're really easy to pull in from here. When you pull in some After Effects ones that are pretty heavy, there may be like a little bit of download time and a little bit of processing time, but these ones are super, super fast. So creating them, animating them, and then saving them as a motion graphics template should really be stepping up your game in terms of rolling this stuff out on any given job. But that's that's all that I had prepared for this, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have as well.
Yeah, if people have questions, feel free to, you can turn on your mics if you want. You can put it in the chat pod. I know there was one question in the chat, and maybe we can start with that one. It talked about, excuse me, when you replace the logo, it says, can you replace from bin within the group? Is there like a selection as opposed to having to add it? And
Yeah, that would be great. That would be really great. There isn't. I think that's a worthwhile feature request. The other thing I would say about that is I probably made that look a little bit like I did my scaling in the actual image. I should have done my scaling with the transform setting itself. So when I brought those original images in, I should have done the scaling with the transform effect, not just the position animation. So I should have scaled it down and moved it into position. And that way I could have just, quickly thrown that Facebook one in, and that would take the scaling as well as the position settings. But yeah, I mean, we are really sort of lacking context menu stuff here. Something like replace with clip in bin would be a great idea, I think.
any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
I'd like to go back to that question I asked about the font size slider. I'm trying to understand exactly what that is. Like if I want to copy the same size font to something else and not necessarily duplicate this whole graphic, but I wanted to use that same size, what does that number mean? Is it 100 points? Is it a percentage of some fixed size?
Yeah,
or
yeah. I went down this rabbit hole a while ago, and let's do it together for a sec, actually. I can't fully recall. I think it is point size, but I'm not sure I have after if I do have, but it's not updated. Let me just, so the trick here, if you want, there is like I feel like there's a little bit of cosmetic surgery done on some of these numbers. So for example, for those who are familiar with the different text types, the different text settings, the leading here is 0. But so the leading is the space between lines, basically. Let me just, I'll actually create some new text to show you what I mean here. So if I typed line 1 and then line 2, the leading is 0, but that does not look like 0 leading to me. So that looks like something else. And I actually found out that 0 leading actually means 120%, or which is what you would usually use inside of After Effects. So if you want to find out what the actual calculation is there, I always just open this stuff in After Effects, and you can actually do that. So you can actually just copy this graphic and paste it in After Effects, or open the Premiere project in After Effects, and you'll actually see that actual number. But in terms of whether that's pixels or points, I think I found out it was actually pixels, but don't quote me on that. But I did go down that rabbit hole at one point.
So if you use that same number on a high definition screen versus a 4K screen, would be a different appearance.
Not if it's pixels. Not if it's pixels, right? If it's pixels, then we're absolute.
Well, if I've got a 1920 by 1080 and it's so many pixels high, and I use that same pixels in a 4K screen, it's going to be 1/2 the height.
Right. Yes. Right. So, yeah. So in terms of relative height, it will be smaller. In terms of absolute height, though, it will be the same. It will still be 100 pixels.
But if you want the appearance to look the same, whether you're at the high definition or 4K resolution, you've got to change that value.
Yes, you do. That's a good point. Yes, you do. And it's probably worth also mentioning this. This is probably too much of a rabbit hole for me to fully go down, but something interesting happens when you move these between different resolutions, or not so much different resolutions, but more different aspect ratios. So if I actually wanted to move this graphic to something that's 1920 by 1920. Let's choose one that actually looks good. I've probably massacred most of these. That were maybe this lower thirds one was looking all right. Maybe. No, what about this one? Let's just try that anyway. When you paste something into something with a different aspect ratio, it will actually try and make it work within that aspect ratio. So you can see that this is 1920 by 1920. It's actually like a little bit, it will actually tell me if I click on it. It's actually, see the percentage has actually gone down there of the, actually that's gone down because that's that. Actually there it's 100%. So 100%, that's 99%. Maybe this was a bad example, but if you are copying and pasting these graphics between different aspect ratios, I'm not sure why 1920 by 1920 isn't doing much, but you will actually see them adjust the overall size of them. So we'll try and adapt to that. But if you're going from HD to 4K and they're still 16:9, I don't think you'll see a difference in that. Or maybe you will. Let's do a test on that. Let's get to the bottom of that together. So let's call this, we'll call this HD. And then we'll do another one that is 4K. So what's 4K? 4K is
3840.
3840, 2160?
Correct.
Yeah, 16:9. There we go. And so, and we'll call this 4K. So both of these are 16:9. Now, if I go in here and just add that text layer, and that's 100 pixels. But the thing you really need to pay attention to is the actual scale here. So the scale setting, if I grab that, I don't think this is going to make any changes to it. That's my prediction here. It's not going to make any changes. So if I move this in, then it is, oh no, look, it has scaled it 200%. So it will scale it relative to the picture then. There you go.
Okay. I'm just trying to keep my head wrapped around the text controls here versus Photoshop. There's very different.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that they are trying to unify these things more. But yeah, certainly the first time I looked at this panel and saw some of these icons, I was like, I don't know what that thing is. Like apparently this is the icon for anchor point, but that wouldn't be my go-to for anchor point. But apparently they're trying to unify them across the apps. That was quite a discovery, finding out that that would go up to 200%. I didn't expect that would happen. But yeah, I guess that's a good thing.
One other question, and is, do MOGRTs created in Premiere Pro have a video thumbnail automatically?
They do. They do. And not a video well, they have a thumbnail, so they have a still image of what they are. And if you have animation in them as well, so for example, that wouldn't be a very useful thumbnail there. You'd probably more want that to be your thumbnail. So always good when you save them to make sure that you have your playhead in the place that you want them to be. And then you have the ability to say include video thumbnail, and it will actually use the position of that playhead to create that thumbnail. In fact, I think, did we see one over here? Yeah, we did. There we go. And I don't think that is showing me animation. Oh no, look at that. It is. There you go. So if you're doing a hover scrub on this, it will actually show you the animation there too. But where you place your playhead is what they call, what do they call it in the project panel? They call it the, it's
just a thumbnail, isn't it?
No, but poster image.
A poster image. Yeah.
Which is something that they sort of hide from the display now, which what is it? What's that part of the panel called that they always hide now? Preview area.
Right.
So this part here is called the poster image.
Yeah, that preview image area, that little information, I used to have that up all the time, and then I switched it off at one point, and it's just, for years now, it's never come back on. But every once in a while I will pop it on to see the properties of a file, because it is
it's incredibly handy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not only that, but it also shows you usage information as well. So I
Yeah.
can see that this graphic is used through all of these different places here, rather than having to bring up usage columns over here.
Yep. Yeah, it is a handy thing.
Mm.
Any other questions? Oh, let's see. We got 3 things here in the chat. Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead and feel free. Turn your mic on.
I got one.
Okay.
I've seen some people on YouTube do this trick where they put the same shot or clip or just side to side, and in fact, well, the soundtracks, played like a little over each other, if you know what I mean. Like how do they do that with Premiere Pro? But
As in terms of video side by side,
yeah,
and the
like the same
soundtracks.
video.
I'm not sure I can quite visualize that.
Well, I could show a clip on my
Wait,
end.
Sure.
So what?
Yeah, if you've got it on you.
So describe it again. It's two clips side by side, just playing the same audio.
Well, yes, the same.
Steve,
I mean-
are you talking about just checkerboarding the audio? Or
Yeah, that's right.
they're overlapping. I think it's just checkerboarding the audio so that you can, when you drop them down, I don't have control of this, but if you drop the audio clips down or if you had them all in a row on a timeline, you'd go ahead and grab the audio clip and just drop it down to a lower layer and then expand maybe both sides. You'd have to turn off your linking and expand the audio clips on both sides, and then you can control your tapers on each one and just checkerboarding. Pretty standard. It's pretty standard stuff for any
Do
kind
we
of
mean
review or-
checkerboarding is like A B, like A B, like
Well,
track
just
to track?
end up with a checkerboard looking thing, I think is what they call it. It's a sort of visual representation, but
I think what
but
he's,
yeah, I think it's basically just a way to do manual crossfades.
but I think what he's saying, you can expand the checkerboard piece, and then you have the overlap. So you have both those sound audio files on. at the
He's
same
doing it
time.
right now.
Okay.
Yeah. So you'd
So checkerboard. So you
unlink one, drop the thing, and then you'd expand the width of the audio layer, assuming that there was room in the clip to do that, which I think there probably, most likely would be. You'd actually stretch it out so that it didn't stop at the cut point.
But what is the
Uh-huh.
purpose here? We don't have audio, do we?
Well, he does. Yeah, there's audio.
I don't think my audio will play here.
So go ahead and take that one you're on right now, Paul, and expand the clip on the audio portion of the clip. Just
You
drag
mean
it to the
extend
right.
it like
Yeah,
that?
extend it, and then take the other one and extend the lower one and extend it to the left. Well, that one extend it both ways.
Yep.
Yeah, and then go the other way, and then
Mhm.
and then just open them up and just do your what is the little white piece up at the top, where you can just do it right in the timeline where you crossfade.
Right.
Is that what you're talking about, Stephen?
Yeah, is that what you're talking about?
You're muted. Stephen, you're still
Yes,
muted.
I'm sorry. It's just this mic. My microphone disappeared for a little bit. Maybe I should just show you a video example.
Sure. Do I need to kick my share
Oh yeah,
off?
here.
Do I need
No,
to stop
you
my
can go
share?
ahead and unshare your screen.
All right.
So Stephen, you can go ahead and share your screen if you want to.
Okay, I'm almost there. It's a YouTube clip. Almost there.
That shortcut to extend just the audio part of the clip as well. Rather than having to unlink those clips, you can just use the Option or the Alt key to adjust only one part of that linkage. So it's sort of temporarily unlink is that shortcut there.
Oh, I got it. So, okay. Let me just share the screen here. Okay, let's see. Oh, okay. Okay, now it's being tricky. Okay. Okay. It needs me to open up privacy and security. It needs me to quit and reopen. Yeah, sorry. It's just it's a new computer.
Oh, well,
I'll be right back.
yeah, no problem. Well, while you're figuring that out, oh yeah, you could share the link in the chat. Maybe that's a good idea.
Okay. All right. Yeah, good idea. Okay. I'll do it right now.
And while Steven's doing that, does anybody else have any other questions for Paul?
Yeah, I have a question. It might be stupid. Sometimes I have trouble with the graphics and title. Actually, the new layer is ghosted half the time. And I just end up clicking around on the different windows until it actually unghosts. What's the rule for the?
So you've got a graphic layer in your timeline. And what do you mean when you say it's ghosted?
So no, when I say, so let's say I want to do a new graphic layer. And I go into new layer, but it's ghosted. It's grayed out.
Oh, it's ghosted. Okay.
And if I click on stuff, sometimes I've clicked on making sure I had making sure I had some video line highlighted. Does that work? Not necessarily. And it just, so if I click enough times, all of a sudden it shows up. I haven't found
Yeah, I'm not sure, because like one of the interesting things about this setting is it's gonna create it even if you don't have the tracks to create it. Like it's gonna add a new track if I add something there. Like it's actually added a new track there. So why it would not allow you to create a graphic?
And I haven't ever tried to do it from the little new layer thing in the essential graphics tab. I've always been done it on the drop down from the
It's ghosted now. If I've got the project panel selected, I can't do it from the menu.
Yeah, that's where
yeah, so that could be it. Shift 3 is what gets you back to the timeline. Or I guess also Shift 4 would probably work too. No, oh yeah, it's not ghosted there. So Shift 3 or Shift 4 will get you back to program or timeline.
and those two things, either the program or the timeline, if they're highlighted or whatever it's called when you puts the line around it selected, that should open up the new layer. Sometimes it just doesn't. Maybe it's just my computer.
Yeah, it should. I find one of the things that I get confused about sometimes is just make sure I have selection follow. If I have this graphic selected and I'm down here and I'm like, oh, I want to add a graphic here. If I'm usually pressing Command T is how I add a new text layer. And I'm sort of like, where's my graphic? I want a graphic right here where my playhead is. Where is it? But because I had that graphic over here selected, Command T has actually added a new text layer to that selected graphic. So that's something I always get caught up on as well.
Okay, thanks.
Now this is the YouTube video here.
Yeah. So, oh, did you get it?
A couple of months ago, I was on a Tinder
that's
date.
loud. Can anybody hear the sound on this, by the way?
I hear it, but just keep playing it until you see it.
Okay.
Oh, well, actually, no. Sorry, I meant to say go to around 15, 50. Yeah, like right around there. Yeah, that's it.
Musical Frollo is none of these.
Yeah, you see,
The closest would be category 2, but I wouldn't call him an asshole in the same vein as Gaston or Clayton. He has unexpectedly kind attributes to him that shine through in spite of his personal biases. But these get
Yeah, you see,
snuffed
that
out
was-
as the story progresses.
Okay, you see,
By
that
his
was where
madness,
they
by
had
his
2 shots, the
lust,
same
by
guy,
his obsession
side by
with being
side.
pious and wiping out anyone who doesn't fit that
So are
description.
you talking about,
Category
like,
2,
duplicating-
the animation to tackle. Not that a cat never tried to become
That was his mistake.
Yeah, that's it.
Musical
Oh.
Frollo is none of the whole
that one
time, but
there.
only pretended to be good.
That was his mistake.
Musical Frollo
Oh, okay. Well, that's you've just duplicated. Geez, it's really hard to get it with my playhead here.
Yeah,
You've
I
just
know.
duplicated the layer and cropped the side of it too, if it was originally 16:9. But what I am hearing,
start to finish, an asshole at the start who becomes full that too complex for kids to understand, but Disney would never try to tackle that sort of thing. Villains either have to be evil from start to finish, an asshole at the start who becomes full-on evil by the end, or a twist villain who is evil the whole time but only pretended to be good.
That was his mistake.
Musical Frollo
I don't know if it's in the original mix or not, but it sounds like they've added like a chorus or a flange effect to the voice as well, which sort of makes it sound doubled up. Now, I think they have a built-in chorus. If I could spell chorus correctly, how do you spell chorus? Chorus flanger, yeah, chorus flange. Now I don't have any audio to play around with here, but that chorus flanger effect should give you this sort of sound of doubling up sound. So you've got the split screen on screen, reverb as well. That's a good point too. Mirror image, not just duplicated. So yeah, so it's actually flipped too. So 2 images side by side. And to my ear, I'm hearing chorus, which is going to make it sound like there are 2 of the same bits of audio and a little bit of reverb added on that as well. Whether or not that was in the original recording, I'm not sure.
Yeah, the reverb, you can add that in the audio panel now as well.
Oh yeah.
There's
You've
that
got some.
there's a slider in the essential audio panel,
Yeah. So
essential sound.
essential sound. Yeah. So probably like dialogue is a good place to get that. So
Yep.
down here under creative, we have reverb, and you've just got some different spaces that it's describing there. But these are really all just presets that are applying the studio reverb effect. And studio reverb is really good for, any type of reverb, and it's not very processor intensive as well. So it's a good one to use.
I see.
So yeah, that would be how to do that.
Can I chime in really quick?
Yep, go ahead.
Thanks. So what I was hearing on that was not all those effects. I was just hearing that same track doubled and slipped about 2 frames. I think would give you about the same sound as what you heard.
Yeah, which is which is the concept of what a
Yeah.
chorus or flange is it's basically offsetting a sound by several frames as well. You could definitely get that effect there too.
Any other questions before we wrap it up here? None? All right. Well, I'm gonna say there's every once in a while we have meetings in this group where, and I've been using Premiere Pro for a long time. I mean, I go back to Premiere 4.2, just to sort of totally age myself. But Paul, there's stuff, man, that you showed tonight that I'm like, holy crap, I didn't know you could do that. And that's why one reason why I love watching other editors do these presentations, because, I think we tend to, as editors, get in habits of doing things certain ways and building workflows that are the most efficient for us because it's just habit. It's what we've done. And it takes somebody else to do something. And you're like, holy crap, I've been doing this the hard way the whole freaking time. And so, yeah, I mean, there were so many things you showed tonight. I'm totally going to rewatch this video again tomorrow and make notes because, yeah, I've been making my life miserable in some ways, just trying the way I do things. And yeah, so I'm saying this as the group leader. I learned a ton tonight. So yeah, it was well worth it, Paul. I can't thank you enough for that presentation. So
No worries. I love talking to people who are passionate about the software. So, I work as an editor every day, and I'm always interested in talking to people who have found a different way of doing something. And, I'd always be happy to come back again and talk about anything else.
Be careful what you wish for.
That's true.
ask
That's true.
for.
Maybe I should take that back.
Eric, when will this be posted up?
I am going to normally I have the meetings posted up the next day. It is I have my tax appointment tomorrow with my tax guy. So that's tomorrow morning. So I don't know if it'll be on tomorrow because I may be crying after that appointment. But no, I'll work to have it up tomorrow.
Thank you. So, I'm sorry I missed it. I spaced out and was working.
Yeah. Oh, and Paul, by the way, I think this is the first time in the 13 and a half years, 14 years, whatever, we've had 2 Australians back to back present.
We're like a rash. We're like a rash.
I got to find another one for next month. So I'm going to got to keep the streak going. So last month, I don't know if you know about this, but we had a guy present on a plugin that he's working on for Premiere where
you're talking about Andrew, right?
Yeah, you know him.
Yeah, good friend. I've talked to him many times, and he is actually a good person to have on call.
Yeah,
I have had I've had projects given to me where I'm like, this is going to take all night to fix. This is horrible, and it's like, can you create a plugin that's just going to do this for like all of this like mindless zombie work for me in a second? And he's like, yeah, I'll do it. This is just my timeline just builds out for me. He's amazing to have. Yeah, Andrew's really, really good.
Yeah, he showed his as a submachine, I think that's working on. And so it's just amazing. So
which I'm doing the testing for at the moment as well. And I just think it's gonna be amazing. I think there's a real demand for it, and it's such a good looking product.
Yeah,
I think it'll be really good.
He just sent me the new beta version of it, so I'm gonna try to find the time tomorrow, this weekend, to play with it. But people like that have that ability. A buddy of mine that when he was in college, he had a brother that's that kind of guy. And my buddy told me a story once, real quick, that at 2 a.m, he was living at home with his parents. His brother was 3 years younger down the hall, and he was writing a paper, and the paper was saved on a disk, a floppy disk. That's how old that is. The disk got corrupted. He woke his brother up and said, "Hey, you got to help me." And he said, "Well, you need a disk editor, and you need this, and I don't have that software." And Tim's like, "Well, what am I going to do?" He goes, and his brother just looked at him and goes, "Hold on, I'll just write you the software. Give me hours." And he literally wrote the software, saved the paper, saved everything, and then just went back to bed. And I'm just like, dude, your brother's a genius. He goes, my brother's a dork, but yeah, he's going to be rich someday.
Well, this is what Andrew did for me only 2 months ago. I think I inherited a project where the editor had used only sequence markers on select sequences. So useful information from the director about that part of the clip. They're sequence markers. Now I start moving those clips around to different sequences. Those markers don't move with them. So I was like, can you just write something that will convert these sequence markers to clip markers? Just did it like that. It was amazing.
I like to believe that we have talents for other things. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to let Paul go because he is, as Andrew was, he is in the future. He's in tomorrow, folks, for those of us here in the States. So
it's looking bleak. It's looking bleak.
But Paul, I can't thank you enough, dude. Next time I see you at any kind of trade show, Adobe Max, from NAB, whatever, I am buying you multiple beers if you're into that sort of thing. So
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Thanks so
you,
much.
Paul. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. And we will see
thank you.
you next month.